I wrote letters I never planned to send. They stayed with me longer than the person they were about. For a while, the pages felt heavier than the rooms they lived in. After the breakup, speaking about it out loud felt imprecise. Conversations compressed months into a few tidy sentences I did not recognize. Friends asked careful, supportive questions. I answered with neutral fragments that closed the topic without ending it. At home, the apartment looked unchanged, yet the paths I took through it were different. I noticed how I avoided certain corners of the room, how I delayed turning on the kitchen light at night. The small table by the window remained unused until one evening, when I sat there with a notebook I had not opened in years. I did not write a greeting. I did not decide who the letters were for. I wrote in short lines, almost notes, as if recording an ordinary process rather than an ending. The first pages held details that felt safer than interpretation. The letters became a loose routine, not daily, not scheduled, but frequent enough to form a quiet pattern. I wrote after the dishes were done, when the apartment settled into its evening stillness. At first, the writing stayed close to the surface. The sound of the elevator in the hallway, the kettle clicking off too early, the empty hook by the door where a jacket used to hang. Over time, the letters began to include moments I had not examined while the relationship was ongoing. Small hesitations during conversations, the way I sometimes paused before asking questions I already suspected the answers to. The convenience of shared silence when clarity felt inconvenient. Some evenings I stopped after a few lines, aware that naming more would weigh the night down. Other evenings I wrote until my hand slowed, until the room felt steadier, as if the act of writing redistributed the weight of the day. There were nights when I wrote about objects I packed into boxes. A mug with a chipped rim. A book we never finished reading aloud. A scarf that still smelled faintly of detergent he preferred. The specificity grounded the writing. The pages did not move me toward conclusions. They allowed the experience to remain particular without demanding resolution. I began to notice that the letters were less about him and more about how the space around me had reorganized itself. Months later, as I was preparing to move, I opened the drawer where the letters were stored. The stack was thicker than I expected. The paper had softened at the edges from frequent handling. I sat on the floor and read one letter from the middle of the pile. The voice on the page sounded familiar, but no longer urgent. It described waiting in the kitchen, the light over the sink left on, the expectation of a sound that did not come. I recognized the scene without feeling pulled back into it. I noticed how the handwriting had changed across the pages, growing steadier as time passed. I realized I had not written anything in several weeks. Not because I had decided to stop, but because the impulse had gradually quieted. The letters had shifted from necessity to record. I placed the stack back into the drawer without arranging it. The apartment felt less provisional now. Not resolved, but stable enough to hold ordinary routines without tension. I began to leave the window open in the evenings. The sounds from the street no longer felt intrusive. While packing, I no longer paused over every shared object. Some items went into boxes without ceremony. Others I set aside, not with reluctance, but with a brief acknowledgement. The table by the window remained where it was. no longer defined by the act of writing. The letters stayed present but inactive, like an archive that did not require consultation. Their presence did not pull at me. It simply occupied a small, contained space in the room. The letters were never meant to be sent. They were meant to keep the experience from collapsing into generalities. They held what I was not ready to bring up in conversation at the time. Now the pages rest in the drawer, without insistence. What they once carried no longer presses for language. If this story felt familiar, there are more like it here.